Hello, I'm Peter Ustinov, and I'm in Berlin, an odd sort of place to choose to talk about motor racing. There's no sign yet that there will be a Grand Prix here, or anything is possible. This would, in that case, be the finishing straight behind me, in which speeds of anything up to 55 miles an hour could be possible by a madman, but overtaking would be difficult. However, many countries have dominated motor racing throughout its history. The Chinese have a lot to teach the Germans about walls, and the Japanese are beginning to teach everyone about motor cars, although you never know where the next champion's going to come from. For the last 3 years before this, it has been the McLaren car with the Tag Porsche engine in it, although there were signs last year that the Williams Honda car with a Japanese engine might quite easily have won the championship in 1986. So we all waited for 87 with bated breaths. There's no late news about this as a Grand Prix course, but I know that Bernie Ecclestone is working on it. It all began in Rio de Janeiro, a full 6 months after the 1986 climax in Australia. The Grand Prix teams reassembled in Brazil for the opening round of the new season. But they had no time to enjoy Ipanema's famous beach or its intimate panoramas. A few miles away at Jacarapagua, the 1987 lineup was getting ready. McLaren headed the list in honor of the #1, twice world champion Alain Prost. With the retirement of Finland's Keke Rosberg, his new teammate was the Swede Stefan Johansson. At Williams, Nigel Mansell had missed last year's title by a mere 2 points and a puncture. Could this be his year? Nelson Piquet, his teammate, was more determined than most that it should not be. In one of the new active suspension Lotuses, a newcomer, Satoru Nakajima, the price to Lotus for Honda engines. And in number 12, the mercurial Ayrton Senna, perhaps under ideal circumstances, the fastest man in Formula One. And Ferrari, still looking for their long-awaited renaissance with Michele Alboreto in his 4th Ferrari year, and Austrian Gerhard Berger, heir to Niki Lauda's mantle. Benetton now had exclusive use of the Ford turbo engine for little Theo Fabi, and joining him, the rapid Belgian Thierry Boutsen in his most competitive drive yet. At Brabham, designer Gordon Murray had left, but the BMW engine remained for Riccardo Patrese, now entering his 11th year in Formula One, and his at times erratic fellow Italian, Andrea De Cesaris. Ditched by Alfa Romeo, Ligier turned to the BMW-based Megatron engine for the veteran René Arnoux and the underrated Italian Piercarlo Ghinzani, although they missed the first race. Arrows were also using the Megatron engine, and two fine drivers too often neglected in 1986, Derek Warwick and the American Eddie Cheever. Both drove for Jaguar in sports car races last year. The smart but unsuccessful Zakspeed team had East Anglian Martin Brundle, and from their home base in Germany, past Formula 3000 champion Christian Danner. So too Minardi, the Italian Motori Moderni engines, and a Spanish driver, Adrian Campos, who joined another underrated Italian, the industrious and ever-optimistic Alessandro Nannini. Last of the turbo runners, the Singleton Ozella Alfa Romeo for another newcomer, Italian Alex Caffi. Left turboless by Renault, Tyrrell moved into the new, normally aspirated category with Jonathan Palmer and the Frenchman Philippe Streiff, so tall as to be often hunched at the wheel. Apart from Philippe Alliot's Lola, which missed the first race, AGS had a somewhat hefty machine for Pascal Fabre, and March returned to Formula One with a neat chassis for Formula 3000 champion Ivan Capelli. Not just new cars and new drivers this season, a compulsory pop-off valve to limit boost pressure to 4 atmospheres had to be fitted to every engine to reduce the turbo car's galloping power. And on the tyre front, just one manufacturer remained. Goodyear decided against withdrawal and agreed to supply identical tyres for everyone. Apart from all of that, the mixture was very much as before, as the hopefuls set out on their first lap of the first qualifying session of the first race of what would turn out to be a long, hard season. 16 races in 5 continents, many thousands of practice and racing laps, 1 million moments of sweat, toil, danger, thrill, and inevitably heartbreak. As much as Nelson Piquet wanted pole position for his home Grand Prix, it was Nigel Mansell who took that pole from Piquet by 44 hundredths of a second. But the crowd were vociferously keen that in the race itself, Brazil would be on top. And now, over the noise of the Patriots and the roar of the engines, here is Simon Taylor.
Not a good start for Poleman Mansell. With too much wheel spin, he was engulfed by the Brazilians. Nelson Piquet went straight to the front, chased by Senna and the Benettons, with Fabi third and Boutsen fourth, and Mansell recovering in 5th place. Down the straight, Williams Honda leads Lotus Honda, and Mansell comes howling past Boutsen to slot into 4th. Already 3 Honda engines in the first 4 cars, but Alain Prost is handily placed 6th ahead of the 2 Ferraris, with plenty of time to plan his strategy. Fabi would prove no problem for Mansell. On lap 3 he was on his tail, and on the straight he went past him into 3rd place. But look at Alain Prost disposing of Boutsen in the same way. Piquet's lead was short-lived. On lap 7 he was in the pit lane, and Senna and Mansell were through. Waste paper had to be cleared from his overheating Williams air intakes, and he rejoined 5th. Mansell closed on Senna, but couldn't pass the active suspension Lotus, and Prost, now 3rd, was creeping closer. Then Mansell lost ground. His car was overheating too. Prost went by into 2nd place, cheered to the echo by the crowd. Mansell decided to make for the pits for an early tyre stop, and this would drop him to 9th place. After only 11 laps, Senna's Lotus needed fresh rubber too, and the ever-canny Alain Prost was leading. 3 laps later came his first stop, and for a brief moment of glory, Thierry Boutsen led a Grand Prix. But there was a Williams Honda on his tail, and before the lap was out, Piquet was through. Four laps later, Nelson was in. 1/3 distance and his 3rd set of tyres. So Mansell led, but at once Prost was there in the 5th change of lead in 14 laps, and Mansell, still overheating, had to let him go. 2 laps later, he was in for his 3rd set. And Senna, who had recovered to 2nd place, was back in a few laps later. Another stop for Mansell after a lap on a punctured rear. And then Senna's race was run, halted by a blown engine, which put Ferraris 4th and 5th. Alboreto gave Berger a worrying moment when his undertray collapsed. So Prost romped home, 40 seconds clear of Nelson Piquet. The reigning champion had opened his account with 9 points. But Nelson was happy with his 2nd place after a difficult race. Behind Johansson, Berger was 4th, and Palmer scored the first 9 non-turbo points.
The first rostrum of the year, and it had a familiar look. World champion Alain Prost on top, and as usual, the vintage of the champagne was of no great concern. And so to Italy, or rather to San Marino, or rather to Italy, for the first European round. San Marino is so small its Grand Prix takes place in Imola, a few miles up the autostrada from the Ferrari's factory in Italy. The Italians, and a handful of San Marinans, take their motor racing seriously, as seriously as do the Brazilians, and they flock to Imola to cheer on their beloved red cars from the start of Friday's practice. Michele Alboreto seemed to have power but lacked handling. He ended up in 6th on the grid, one behind teammate Gerhard Berger. But Friday's real excitement came from Nelson Piquet. This huge accident happened at over 170 miles an hour in the Curva Tamburello.
What I remember, the car went complete sideways. And after that, I tried to close my eyes.
Piquet was no more than shaken and bruised, but Formula One's doctor, Sid Watkins, was not convinced that he should be allowed to race.
He might be fit enough, but on the other hand, he might not. And in this particular sport, and with the speeds that we've got, I don't think anybody should take an unreasonable risk. There's risk enough in driving when you're absolutely fit and on top of the whole business. And apart from his own safety, we have other people to consider around the circuit.
The accident was thought to be due to tyre failure. Just to be sure, Goodyear flew in 400 new tyres overnight. Well, to Piquet's disgust, he was not allowed to start. And it was Ayrton Senna who gave active suspension its first pole position, with a lap in the Lotus 12/100ths quicker than Mansell's Williams. But 2 Ferraris on row 3, that and an adequate supply of liquid refreshment was much more important to the enthusiastic crowd than the occupants of the front 2 rows.
And on those front 2 rows, the old protagonists Mansell and Senna, plus championship leader Prost and outsider Fabi. And a clean start, with Senna getting away perfectly, but Mansell's Williams immediately tucking in behind the Lotus. With no Piquet to disturb his personal battle with Senna, Nigel always looked supremely confident at Imola. All the crowded traffic was behind him, and he was waiting to pounce. Prost was playing his usual waiting game in 3rd place, ahead of the Ferraris, with Patrese Brabham 6th. All down the field, the battles raged. Lap 2, and Mansell made his challenge. His Williams was now filling Senna's mirrors, and after the curves following the pits, he chose his moment, ducking out of the slipstream to drive effortlessly round the outside into the lead. Senna fought back, but Mansell kept the door firmly shut and started to pull away. Behind them, Fabi was making up places after a first-lap brush with Cheever. Williams, Lotus, McLaren, Ferrari, Brabham, the first 6, with Patrese looking very strong. But already, Mansell's lead was huge, and Prost was able to dart neatly past Senna into 2nd place. Now, could the world champion catch Mansell and make a race of it? Alain tucked himself down in the McLaren's cockpit and went for it. A spin for Nannini's Minardi, giving De Cesaris and Alex Caffey something to think about. And now the Ferraris were on Senna's tail. Listen to the crowd as Alboreto goes ahead. Perhaps Gerhard Berger could do the same. And now, another cheer. Prost was slowing, and a Ferrari was 2nd. Although Berger, down on power, was dropping back. Alboreto led Senna through the back markers, cheered at every corner. Prost, meanwhile, was calling it a day. Patrese was driving like one possessed, outbraking Berger for 4th. Then Johansson went by into 5th, and the down-on-power Berger was peeling off into the pits and out of the race. Just over 1/3 distance, and Mansell was in for tyres, earlier than planned because a wheel was out of balance. So now a Ferrari led a Grand Prix in Italy, with Senna 2nd behind Alboreto, Patrese 3rd, and Mansell already up to 4th. 3 laps later came Alboretto's routine stop. And then Senna's. And Mansell was back in front, with Patrese storming along in second place. Johansson, 5th, had set fastest lap so far. But in the closing stages, Patrese suddenly slowed. The Senna-Alboretto battle for 3rd became a battle for 2nd. And Patrese's best race in recent times had been frustrated by a misfire that would drop him all the way down to 9th place. Mansell was simply in a class of his own, and as the race ran out, he was able to drive to preserve his fuel, always a worry on this circuit. With Piquet non-starting and Prost retired, there was never going to be another result today. Senna was relieved to finish 2nd, almost half a minute down, while behind Alboretto and Johansson, Brundle and Nakajima, 2 laps down, picked up the other points.
So a Ferrari driver did get to the rostrum, but it was a Honda-powered 1-2, and Mansell had made it look easy. This duel between Senna and Mansell was fought with champagne. 2 weeks later, their confrontation would be a little less friendly. This is the Ardennes forest in eastern Belgium, and through it runs a public road which at specific times makes up the historic Spa circuit. Even in the dry, as we see from the cockpit of Satoru Nakajima's Lotus, its swooping curves are heart-stoppingly fast. When it rains, as it often does at Spa, it's even more of a challenge, as Nigel Mansell discovered in Friday's qualifying.
You get to one corner which might be drying out a little bit, or you just have a line in the wet, and you get there the next lap and it's all changed, and that's why, of course, driving in the rain is dangerous. And also the visibility, you can be behind another car, say 500 yards away, you still can't see anything.
Some of Saturday was dry, but then it rained again. Nelson Piquet also found the conditions impossible.
It's crazy. You see nothing. If you two cars in front of you, in the first 100 meters behind, you see exactly nothing.
Peter Wall, the Lotus chief, and Ayrton Senna were able to discuss the weather on the car-to-pits radio while Senna was busy qualifying.
We go for it. Only this pit here is wet, all the rest is dry, but it's coming some light rain. I can feel it, so we have to go for it.
I've already told them, Ayrton. More important, Prost has just left the pits with dry tyres.
Okay, but it's very dangerous at the moment. Dry tyres is very dangerous. Around the pit area, down the hill at the quick gases, is very, very dangerous. Too much water and also oil.
But for Sunday, the weather relented. It was dry.
And in the sunshine, an all-Williams front row, and it was pole sitter Mansell who led the determined Senna, Piquet and the Ferraris into the tight La Source hairpin, with Alain Prost keeping out of harm's way. Miraculously, they all got through, and at the top of the hill they were in the same order, with Prost 6th and the 3 Honda-powered cars at the head of the queue. By the bus stop chicane, Nigel was pulling away. Local hero Thierry Boutsen was 7th in the Benetton. But at the start, he'd had a nudge with Berger's Ferrari, which had weakened his rear suspension. Past the pits, it broke. And as the rest of the field swept by, it looked as though the Belgians' home Grand Prix was over. Then a major accident up the hill. The Tyrrell of Streff had crashed, and teammate Palmer had hit the wreckage. Both were unhurt. The third car was that of Alliot, who had stopped to help. But the race had to be halted, so the wreckage could be cleared. Streff, ever a cool customer, opted to take over the spare Tyrrell. So the grid was lined up a second time, with only Palmer missing. And this time, Senna's start was stunning. From row 2 to the lead in one great lunge, which quite took Mansell by surprise. Round La Source, down the hill, and up the hill. Mansell furiously trying to gain the lead that he regarded as rightfully his. Piquet was third, Alboreto fourth, Prost fifth, and Boutsen in the spare peloton. So Piquet was handed the lead from Alboreto, Prost, Boutsen and Fabi, with Berger's Ferrari already coughing its last. And once again, Alain Prost was the man to watch, taking second place from Alboreto as Michele's Ferrari too started to trail smoke. But the leader Piquet was slowing as well, falling to Prost's clutches just as Alboreto parked. At the start line, Prost came through alone, pursued by Fabi's Benetton. Boutsen was out with a broken drive shaft, and Piquet was in the pits, his turbo blown. Prost's routine stop was a model of McLaren efficiency. It took just 7.9 seconds and he didn't lose the lead. And Mansell, whose Williams had underbody damage after that spin, called it a day. Behind Johansson's McLaren, which was second, Andrea de Cesaris was having a great race, snatching third place from Fabi at the bus stop. So an unflustered Prost reeled off the final laps, although Philippe Alliot's spin could have cost him dear. Alliot restarted to win the non-turbo category. With this victory, Prost hadn't just been lucky. He had, as always, driven with intelligence as well as speed. And with Johansson second, there was cause for real celebration at McLaren. And de Cesaris, despite running out of fuel, self-propelled his Brabham into a fine third place. And the only Honda-powered finisher was Nakajima, fifth.
It had not been a good day for Honda, nor for Nigel Mansell's image. And this 1-2 for McLaren had put Prost and Johansson first and second in the championship, with the three Honda-powered men next. In the new contest for drivers of normally aspirated cars, the Jim Clark Cup, the Tyrrell drivers were already dominant. The Constructors' Championship confirmed McLaren's superiority so far. Tyrrell were similarly in the clear in the Colin Chapman Cup for the non-turbo constructors. At Monte Carlo, the palace watches serenely over the wealthiest harbour in the world. Each year, in one weekend in May, it becomes even wealthier as the Grand Prix circus arrives. After Spa, Alain Prost had scored 27 Grand Prix wins, equaling the all-time record of Jackie Stewart, whose mark could now be passed this weekend. As Jackie watched qualifying, he was philosophical about the prospect of his record being broken.
Alain Prost at the present time, in my opinion, is the finest Grand Prix driver in the world, probably the finest race driver in the world, and therefore I'm very happy that it's him that's taking it and not someone who I would not have been proud to have it.
In practice, Prost qualified fourth, good but not ideal on a track where overtaking is so difficult. Mansell, on the other hand, was in indomitable form. He was clearly the fastest throughout qualifying, forcing the Williams through the streets to end up 3/4 of a second clear of Senna, who was just 4/100ths ahead of Piquet. But just how unforgiving Monaco can be was demonstrated by Gerhard Berger, who let his Ferrari bounce over a curb. But he got away more lightly than Michele Alboreto, as this spectator's video shows. The car Alboreto hit was Christian Danner's Zach speed, as Danner explains to Martin Brundle. And many thought it was unfair when Danner was disqualified from the event because of it. Danner was going slowly, having just left the pits on fresh tires, but the gap Alboreto went for was just too narrow.
Well, it was Mansell versus Senna again, but this time Mansell was determined to do it right. He led from the green light, with Senna, Piquet, Alboreto and Prost in pursuit. As ever, there was plenty of bumping and boring in Saint-Devote on lap 1. But as the tight queue thundered through the narrow streets, up the hill to Casino Square, and then down again towards the harbour, Mansell was already easing away at the front. At the nose hairpin, watch René Arnoux overtaking down the inside, put paid to teammate Ginzani's nose fin. Tabak and Mansell's lead was bigger, but Senna was settling down in second place, and behind Piquet, Alboreto was looking good. Stefan Johansson was already slowing with a misfire. Raskas, full bore in bottom gear, but Senna was dropping back. Down from Casino Square and past the tip-top bar, the pattern was set. Mansell, Senna, Piquet, Alboreto, Prost and Cheever in the arrows. At Monaco, the barriers are ever beckoning. Philippe Streff fell into their clutches. He buried his Tyrrell in Armco opposite the Hotel de Paris. He was briefly trapped, but not seriously hurt. But on lap 29, the pattern changed. Mansell slowed. Senna was on his tail. And out of the chicane and along the waterfront, the Lotus went through. Mansell was clearly in trouble. In the pits, the mechanics waited to rush into action, optimistically changing tyres. But Senna was long gone. And Mansell was out of the car, a broken exhaust pipe robbing him of Honda power. Behind Senna, the second-place battle was between Piquet, Alboreto and Prost. Overtaking is never easy at Monaco, and predictably Prost couldn't find a way past the Ferrari, dogging its wheel tracks until Alboreto darted into the pits for his routine tyre stop. The two arrows of Cheever and Warwick were going well, split by Berger's Ferrari. But as Senna reeled off the laps, suddenly both the arrows were out. Warwick's gear linkage had broken, and he walked away. And Cheever, who'd held third place for a while, parked with a blown engine. And Alain Prost, with 3 laps to go, lost a sure third place with serious engine maladies. That 28th victory would not be his yet a while. By contrast, Senna's Lotus never missed a beat. On his final lap, even before the checkered flag, he was accepting applause from the marshals. Following him home in a fine 5th place was Jonathan Palmer, non-turbo category winner. There was delight in the Lotus pit as Ayrton scored the first win for active suspension. Nelson Piquet was an unchallenged second, but thanks to Mansell's misfortune, the day belonged to Ayrton Senna, and for the first time there were 2 non-turbos in the top 6.
Senna was a happy man. In Monte Carlo, you're not supposed to spray the princely family with champagne. It smacks of Drench majesty. And Peter Ward tried to act as a shield, so the frustrated Ayrton turned his attention onto a policeman, among others. The next Grand Prix should have taken place here, in Canada. But that was cancelled, so round 5 was over the water in Detroit, on a very different round-the-houses track. Weather for qualifying was hot and dry. Determined to improve on his lowly 5th place in the championship table, Nigel Mansell took another fine pole position, while Ayrton Senna, still on a high after his Monaco win, showed how well the active suspension Lotus worked over the Detroit bumps by taking 2nd on the grid. Nelson Piquet, who says he dislikes street circuits, took 3rd place on the grid, but he was 1.3 seconds slower than Mansell. Thierry Boutsen was 4th with a Benetton, the Belgian's best starting position so far this year, while Alain Prost was not very happy with the McLaren in 5th place.
My car doesn't like bumps at all, and because of that, and because also this year we have only one kind of Goodyear tire, which I think suits a little bit better the Williams than us. I think we would need a softer compound for this, especially for this track. I know it's going to be difficult, and physically very difficult, very tiring.
Eddie Cheever, as America's only Formula One driver, was in an excellent and very popular 6th place with the Arrows Megatron. His English teammate Derek Warwick was 10th. With the threat of rain on race morning, did he think the drivers minded if it was wet or dry?
You got to have to run a street circuit like this is too much of a lottery. You know, I mean, it's so easy to spin, to lock a brake up, to touch wheels, not to see anything. I'm 10th on the grid, so I'm going to have a lot of spray in front of me, so for sure I want dry. I think Arrows now have made a point that we now race for the top 6, not inherit the top 6, and maybe we can run on the rostrum, you know. Every single Grand Prix this year we've run 4th and 5th, and I think that puts us in good stead for here.
Detroit may not have the glamour of Monte Carlo, but it's an even tighter round-the-houses track, and street circuit expert Nigel Mansell was determined to find recompense for his bad luck at Monaco.
And he set about the task from the green light with a perfect start from pole. Senna 2nd, Piquet 3rd, and Cheever, after a stunning getaway from the 3rd row, in 4th place. It was looking like Monaco all over again. Mansell ahead and pulling away, Senna leading the pursuit, Prost down in the traffic, watching for lap 1 shunts. And predictably these happened. One involved Satoru Nakajima's Lotus, which we can share with his onboard camera. After clouting the back of Capelli's March, he recovered from that, and then going down to the next corner, he nearly collected the back of Alio's Lola. Things got a bit better for the next couple of corners, but then came a thump from behind, and the Lotus was spinning to a halt. From another angle, we can see that he has collided with the Minardi of Campos. While all that was happening at the back, at the front, Mansell was building up a big lead from Senna, and Piquet was being harried by the impressive Cheever. Cheever managed to muscle past Piquet on lap 3 because the Williams had a puncture and was on its way to the pits. So Cheever was now 3rd. The only American in Grand Prix racing was certainly shining in his home Grand Prix. Fabi, Alboreto and Berger were next up. But Teo Fabi had other ideas. This attack not only succeeded in tearing off the Benetton's nose cone as well as some of its hydraulics, but sadly it also punctured Cheever's right rear tyre. As the Americans struggled back to the pits, once again things seemed to happen in tandem for the Arrows team, because now Derek Warwick had broken rear suspension. Piquet, after his lap 3 stop, was storming through the field, passing Patrese and the misfiring Johansson for 7th place by lap 17. A rather warm tyre change for Martin Brundle's Zach Speed turned into a real fire, and that ended his race. Thierry Boutsen's Benetton was short of brakes, and it lost 4th place to Prost and was now coming under threat from Berger's Ferrari. 2 laps after half distance, Mansell, with a comfortable lead, came in for a routine tyre stop. Senna, who had worries about his brakes, didn't look really threatening at this stage. But Nigel's stop was a slow one. The right rear tyre jammed. And by the time Nigel rejoined, he dropped to 3rd. Now Senna led. But when Prost had his tyre stop, Mansell was back to 2nd. And in this frantic moment among back markers, Piquet pushed Prost down to 4th. Philippe Alliot was one of several to hit the wall with the Lola Cosworth. And Philippe Streff's dramatic season continued with this 3-wheel effort. He was holding 6th place when his Tyrrell's right rear developed a will of its own. Fortunately, it kept out of the path of the rest of the race traffic. 10 laps to go, and suddenly Piquet was 2nd, and Prost was 3rd. Nigel Mansell was slipping back. He was in great pain from cramp in his right leg, and was now threatened by Berger's Ferrari. All this time, Senna, having made no tyre stop, was maintaining his lead on his original rubber and setting fastest lap on the way. Over Detroit's bumps, the mix of his skill and the Lotus Active suspension had proved unbeatable. Piquet's second was reward for a really hard drive after that early puncture. Not only were Brazilians 1 and 2 in the race, now a Brazilian was leading the World Championship. And after his delays, Eddie Cheever got a point for 6th place.
So 2 in a row for Senna, another 2nd place for Piquet, some points for Prost, and a 3rd bad weekend for Mansell. In the championship, he dropped to 5th behind Johansson, and Senna was leading from Prost. In the Constructors' Championship, tag-powered McLarens were still on top, but the Honda-powered hordes were closing in, none too slowly. Back to Europe now, the olive groves and pungent valleys of southern France, near Marseille, and the Paul Ricard circuit at Le Castellet, basking in a hot Mediterranean sun. As Nigel Mansell led the field out for the qualifying, he knew that Senna, Prost and Piquet were all comfortably ahead of him in the championship. After leading almost every race this year, he'd only won one of them, so a result here was absolutely vital. Let Satoru Nakajima show us round the track. It's wide and open with a very long straight. And at the end of this straight, he'll slow from 200 miles an hour to a mere 180 for the notorious senior corner. Mansell's determination produced a perfect qualifying lap and another pole position. So perhaps this week would see the end of his recent frustrations.
Motor racing is very frustrating anyway, but obviously we have a very good chance for tomorrow, and I just keep my fingers crossed. I'm very positive that we've had our problems for the year, and now everything will be okay.
Optimistic stuff from Nigel, but the reigning champion on his home ground was a superb 2nd fastest, Prost's best start position since Monza last year.
The cars are improving all the time, you know, the first few races, but now it starts to be more like it's going to stay a little bit like that. So the cars, very competitive at this stage of the season, will be competitive until the end. So it's very important to be good there. I'm very optimistic, maybe too much, I don't know.
With 2 recent victories and the championship lead, Ayrton Senna was 3rd on the grid. The Honda engine in his Lotus helped him to be a 2nd faster than the Williams Honda of Nelson Piquet. 3 Honda-powered cars in the top 4 on this circuit where power is so important. Thierry Boutsen's Benetton was a strong 5th, and despite the team's reliability problems, the Belgian was confident.
Yeah, chassis feels very good, very, very good. And so does the engine. You know, when it's going very well. But at the moment, it's not long enough.
So you're a little bit more confident?
Oh yeah, for sure. I'm always confident with this team. You know, I enjoy driving for this team very, very much, and it's. I mean, I'm very confident in everything.
But teammate Theo Fabi suffered no less than 3 engine failures during qualifying, which contributed nothing to the team's morale. Amid rumors of dissension in the Ferrari camp under its new technical boss John Barnard, Gerhard Berger was 6th on the grid, a full 1.5 seconds slower than Mansell's pole. Teammate Michele Alboreto was nearly 2 seconds adrift in 8th place. So as Michele confirmed, the Ferrari renaissance was still not a reality.
Yes, the car getting better all the race, but the gap between the Williams, for example, and McLaren and Lotus is still too much. Here we have a big problem in the front in our car. We have a big understeer and we destroy the tires very soon. So I'm not so optimistic for the race, but there is also tomorrow to find the right setup, and I hope to be better.
After the tight circuits of Monaco and Detroit, the French Grand Prix marked the return to the fast tracks, with Mansell in particular hoping it would mark a change in his recent fortunes.
With France's world champion closest to him on the grid and Honda power helping him to get away clear, Mansell led from the start, down into the first turn at the foreshortened Ricard circuit, which can always produce lap 1 incidents. This time it was De Cesaris who savaged Johansson's nose fin. Somehow everyone else muddled through, and on that long back straight came another demonstration of Honda power as Piquet leapfrogged past Prost and Senna closed up in 4th place. Next came the two Benettons, Boutsen leading Fabi, and the two Brabhams, De Cesaris leading Patrese. Of the Ferraris, Alboreto was down in 9th place, and his teammate Berger had all but stalled on the grid. So it was a Williams head-to-head battle. The points-hungry Mansell was easing away from Piquet, Prost was holding off Senna, and behind the top 6, Andrea De Cesaris was smoking. The smoke became fire, and the fire spelt retired. Then came a mistake for Piquet. Under pressure from Prost, he left his braking too late for that difficult first corner. It only lost him 1 place because Senna wasn't close, but it was good news for Mansell. Martin Brundle had just stopped for tyres when this happened. We don't know what he said to his right rear crew in the Zakspeed pit. Lap 30 and Piquet, still 3rd, was in for tyres. He rejoined 5th behind Boutsen, and then Boutsen promptly retired with Duff Electrics. And then Prost was in with an excellent 7-second stop. Ayrton Senna had stopped too, and on rejoining, at once Prost was on Piquet's tail for 2nd as they came up to lap Johansson. But despite this challenge, Piquet was able to hold him off. Mansell's stop was a shade slower at almost 9 seconds. But he came out on Alain Prost's tail. At once, he was all over the back of the McLaren. And planning his move nicely, he was able to use backmarker Nakajima to box Prost in and take 2nd place. Now he set off after Nelson Piquet. So it was Williams versus Williams once more, and Mansell was in relentless form. Round the long double right-hander after scene, he was alongside and forcing himself through to lead. Behind the lapped Alboreto Ferrari, Prost was resigned to 3rd place. But then Piquet, having been the first front runner to stop for tyres, needed a 3rd set, and this stop was a disaster. He stalled the engine. A deafening silence as the time ticked away. It was 16 seconds before the engine restarted and he stormed out again, 3rd. But again, Prost just lacked the power to hold the Williams Honda off on this fast track, and Piquet was soon 2nd again. So Mansell was back in the winner's circle and proving a point about his form against his teammate, who nevertheless took his 3rd 2nd place on the trot, which did his championship points total no harm. But Ayrton Senna, finishing 4th, kept the championship lead by a point.
There was a new twist to the champagne ritual. Prost dropped his bottle. An uncharacteristic lack of coordination, but at least Mansell was smiling again. Silverstone was the scene of the first post-war British Grand Prix, although its airfield origins are now barely discernible. The track is all fast curves, except for this year. After Abbey Curve and into Woodcote, there's this new chicane. Its unpopularity with the drivers is voiced by Martin Brundle.
It's everything Silverstone isn't. I mean, Silverstone is a flowing, beautiful, high-speed track, and suddenly you've got a second-gear chicane in it that's slippery and bumpy. But, you know, they had to do it. The authorities wanted them to do it, and that's what they had to do. So you can't criticise Silverstone for it. It's just a shame that all of the world circuits are going that way.
And who better for an example of how not to do it than Andrea De Cesaris? And once you're in the gravel, it's all too easy to dig yourself in deeper. This is Nigel Mansell country, and there was no doubt who the huge crowd was supporting. Nigel's last-ditch efforts to take pole on his home track were thwarted by the new chicane, but he gave the crowd a spectacle getting the car back onto the road. Nelson Piquet was trying a bit too hard also, compensating perhaps for the lack of a Brazilian crowd, and at this moment at Abbey Curve he just missed a course marker. Pole position was his by 7/100th of a second, but before the race he was cautious.
Well, tires is the biggest question mark here, because fuel you can control. Tires you cannot control. It's very different. When the tires get bad, they get bad, and you have nothing you can do. When you get blisters in the tires, it's not a wearing problem, it's a blister problem, it's a high temperature problem. When they start to blister, they can big pieces can come apart. You can maybe blow up in a straight line or in the middle of the corner. That's a problem.
But perhaps Piquet's biggest problem here at Silverstone was the motivation of Mansell, willing himself to win in front of his home crowd, almost regardless of the consequences.
Yes, Mansell on his home track in front of his home crowd, a potent combination. But as the Williams Hondas moved away, it was Alain Prost from the second row who made a slingshot start to take the lead going down into Copse. But soon Honda Power was able to deal with that. And by Beckett's, a Williams was ahead. But it was Piquet's Williams. Through Beckett's, Chapel Curve, and onto the Hangar Straight, before Nigel Mansell was able to move past the McLaren into second place. Cheered on by the crowd. The Woodcote chicane, and behind the Williamses and the McLarens, Senna was fourth, Boutsen fifth, and Alboreto sixth. Prost went wide at Copse, which let Senna through. Further down, Berger lunged at Warwick and got pushed onto the Beckett's curves for his pains. So while Mansell sat in second place behind Piquet and pondered his strategy, a queue built up behind Senna in the battle for third. Prost and Alboreto were pushing hard, and Prost went past the Lotus in this perfect manoeuvre between Woodcote and Copse. Alboreto had a grandstand view. Once more, De Cesaris's race came to an early and fiery end. And so did that of the number 2 McLaren and Stefan Johansson. But at the front, while Mansell was keeping with Piquet, he wasn't closing on him. It was thought that this could have been a race without tyre stops, but a balance weight had gone from one of Nigel's front wheels, and on lap 35 he was in the pits. Nine and a half agonising seconds later, he was back in the race, now almost half a minute behind Nelson to start one of the drives of his career. Through the back markers, he closed on Piquet and had him in his sights with 10 laps to go. The crowd were ecstatic. Alboreto, lying fifth, retired. And Alain Prost, in a secure fourth place, had more electrical trouble again. And with 4 laps left, the Williams Hondas were nose to tail. Out of Beckett's, through Chapel Curve, and then onto Hangar Straight. In the slipstream, Nigel Mansell plans his move. He feints to the left. There he goes. Piquet moves to block him. Mansell goes to the right. He's alongside. The two cars almost touch on the apex of Stowe Corner, but Mansell is through and, cheered on by the crowd, arrives at Woodcote in a secure lead. The roar of the crowd almost deafened the cars, and Nigel, his Williams on its last gasp of fuel, was the hero of the day. The Williams really did run out of fuel on its slowing down lap, which allowed the crowd to demonstrate their Mansell worship close to. Almost unnoticed, this was a Honda 1, 2, 3, 4, with Derek Warwick 5th and Jonathan Palmer, the normally aspirated victor, in 8th place.
Receiving the trophy from Prince Michael of Kent, Mansell could savour a race with a real storybook ending. This, at last, was Nigel's day. Next stop, Germany and the huge stadium of Hockenheim, where the grandstands can welcome 100,000 fans. Frank Williams seemed unperturbed by rumours that Honda would take their engines to McLaren next year. Nigel Mansell and the Honda engine crew worked on to earn Nigel's 6th pole of the season. Ayrton Senna joined Mansell on the front row, despite this off-course excursion when the Lotus jumped out of gear at the second chicane. Rumour was putting him in a McLaren Honda next year. Alain Prost, the confident third fastest, had already signed for 2 more years at McLaren. Teammate Stefan Johansson had heard the rumours and wasn't relishing being replaced by Senna next year. McLaren boss Ron Dennis was keeping quiet, but obviously Ayrton knew more than he was telling. The Honda engine, the most powerful in the formula, was the key to all this gossip. And Nelson Piquet, not keen to stay in the same team as Nigel Mansell, would certainly not want to stay with Williams without Honda power. Michele Alboreto was 5th behind Piquet, the Ferrari handling better thanks to a new rear wing, and Thierry Boutsen was 6th, his Benetton now using bigger turbos. And an impressive 7th was the Italian Andrea De Cesaris with the Brabham. He is a Hockenheim enthusiast.
I think this particular race, I hope to finish in the top 3.
That's very confident. So obviously the fuel consumption is good because it's pretty tough here, isn't it?
Yes, yesterday and a little bit this morning we did some consumption tests, and the car, the engine consumption was not so much, so that's why I think it could be possible.
So the stage was set for the 8th round of the 16-race season. Before this year was half done, the politics and attendant rumours about next year were well underway.
But as the field formed up, all thoughts were just on today's race, with Lotus and McLaren splitting the Williams pair on the grid. And at the green, Senna gave us one of his classic starts, with Prost edging out Mansell into the first corner. Poor Martin Brundle's Zach Speed was left on the grid. On the fast back stretches, Mansell was already up to 2nd, from Prost, Piquet, Boutsen and Alboreto. Into the first chicane they held station, with Stefan Johansson in 7th place, ahead of De Cesaris, Berger, Fabi, Warwick and René Arnoux. The leading non-turbo was Philip Streff's Tyrrell. At the Ostkurve, Senna had pulled out a little, but the order was unchanged. On went the high-speed procession, and into the stadium, Prost's McLaren was for once at no apparent disadvantage to the Hondas. Boutsen, 5th, was also looking strong. Out of the stadium, Nigel Mansell made his move and went ahead. And suddenly it was looking all rather predictable. But Alain Prost in particular, in 3rd place, was keen on a different script. Williams, Lotus, McLaren, Williams, Ferrari. And then Prost, in a demon-out-braking manoeuvre into the stadium, took the McLaren up into 2nd place. And for the first time this year on the faster tracks, Mansell's power wasn't enough to keep Prost at bay. Behind them, Piquet had also got past Senna. Up to the first chicane, another effortless Prost manoeuvre. Honda-powered cars are 2nd, 3rd and 4th, but the McLaren tag was moving away. Mansell was now under pressure from Piquet. But the order at the front didn't change, with Prost leading and moving away, until the routine pit stops just before half distance. Prost's pit stop included a drama with the jack, because, watch, Ron Dennis pulls away his lollipop too soon. A typical sight on a hot day at Hockenheim, this is Derek Warwick retiring his arrows, and after the stops it was still Prost leading from Mansell and Piquet. But then Mansell was out, with 20 laps to go, with engine failure. Alessandro Nannini, in an excellent 7th place, had the same trouble with his Minardi. It just looked more spectacular. So Nigel Mansell out of his car, over the fence and walking away. And Ayrton Senna, in all sorts of suspension trouble, was in the pits because he'd scraped away his nose cone and needed a new one. But Germany wasn't to be Prost's race. Yet again he was stopped by a broken alternator drive, and this left the happy Mr. Piquet in an unchallenged lead. Promoted to 2nd place was a delighted Stefan Johansson, while Alain Prost sat in the woods and had a think about life. Nelson Piquet was able to go on to score perhaps the easiest 9 points of the year. And of course it was the 3rd Williams-Honda win on the trot. Stefan Johansson, meanwhile, was scoring perhaps the toughest 6 points of his career. A late puncture had left him to drive home the entire final lap on 3 wheels. A gutsy finish that delighted the crowd and certainly pleased a relieved Stefan. The destructive nature of the Hockenheim circuit meant only 6 finishers, an extraordinary result, with Philipp Streff 4th and 1st non-turbo home.
Once more, Nelson Piquet was in luck, this time at the expense of both Prost and Mansell. It's the sort of luck that wins world championships. And in the points table, Piquet was the new leader by 4 points from Senna, with Mansell 9 points behind and Prost 13 adrift, while Palmer led the Jim Clark Cup. In the Constructors' Championship, Williams were starting to look secure, as did Tyrrell in the Colin Chapman Cup. They'd even got into 5th place in the Constructors' Championship proper. This is the Danube flowing through Budapest. And this is the impressive Hungaro Ring, which is being used for only the 2nd time for a World Championship Grand Prix. We are entering the 2nd half of the season with a tardy salute to Glasnost and all its many implications. Even though it cost several times the average weekly salary for a Hungarian to get a seat on race day, the circuit was packed to capacity. Nelson Piquet was the center of attention. While all the rumors surrounded Senna and McLaren, Piquet and Lotus had quietly got together. Why had Nelson decided to leave Williams?
Well, it's a comeback in 1985 when I decide to come to Williams. I have a chance to go to another team, to another top teams, and I decide to come here because I got an offer contract of first driver. And we lost the championship last year, fighting between me and Nigel, and maybe we can have this year the same. And I don't want to sign again for more 1 or 2 years and have the same problem. I got an offer from Lotus to be a #1 driver with. It doesn't matter what driver come, but the driver will be a #2 driver, and in that case, I prefer to go to Lotus and do maybe 2 or 3 or 4 years at Lotus.
Now you're going to be undisputed #1 at Lotus. Who do you think should come and join Williams here?
I think they should get Senna here.
Well, that's a bit of Piquet humor, because one can't really imagine Senna and Mansell in the same team. But Frank Williams was still happy to pass on the joke in the Lotus pit. But when it came to the serious business of earning pole position, once again Nigel Mansell was in a class of his own. The agility of the Williams was perfect for this tight track. But the surprise came from Ferrari. Gerhard Berger vanquished Piquet and Prost to put a Ferrari on the front row for the first time in 2 years. Perhaps at last the Rinascimento had begun. The normally aspirated cars, having outlasted most of the turbos at Hockenheim, were expected to shine on this track. Behind Philippe Streif's Tyrrell, Philippe Alliot was second fastest with the Lola that is run by the vastly experienced Gérard Larousse. But leading the normally aspirated trophy at this point was the other Tyrrell driver, Jonathan Palmer. Did he think the results of Hockenheim were the shape of things to come?
Hockenheim was lucky for us, I think we have to say that although we finished 4th, 5th, 6th, or normally aspirated cars did, we've got to be honest enough to admit that the very high attrition rate of a very demanding circuit like Hockenheim, a lot of teams had engine failures and that helped us. But then, of course, Monaco we scored points on just a combination of speed and reliability. I think here in Hungary too, we're definitely going to have the sufficient speed to score some points. Whether enough turbos will have engine problems here, though, just to clear out a few of those places, I don't know. I think it'll be hard to get in the top 6 here, but I think we'll do it. I think there'll be a normally aspirated car in the top 6.
Next season, of course, with the turbos reduced by regulation from 4-bar boost to 2.5, the normally aspirated cars should be winning some races. But for the time being, it was Ferrari in among the usual Honda tag battle as the grid lined up.
But Berger didn't make good use of his front row grid position. He moved too soon, then faltered, and it was Piquet tucking in behind Mansell as they dived into the first corner. But Berger went round the outside and Alboreto followed. So as they came down the hill through turn 2, it was Williams, Ferrari, Ferrari, Williams, followed by Senna and Prost. Behind Prost, Thierry Boutsen was looking threatening. Stefan Johansson was the next up. And in fact, already Alain Prost was having an unhappy time. The up-front battle was well and truly joined. Berger hanging on to Mansell, Alboreto chasing his teammate, ahead of Piquet. But clearly, Prost's McLaren was down on power. Thierry Boutsen sneaked through on the inside to take 6th place. Through the tight twists and turns of the Hungaroring, the Ferraris battled away with the Williams Hondas. The rest of the field was slipping back. Senna from Boutsen, Prost struggling on with his misfire, and then Stefan Johansson sitting obediently behind his team leader. The Ferraris were clearly able to live with the Williams Hondas. And if anything, Piquet was struggling to keep up. On the start-finish straight, Mansell, Berger, stretching out up to 185 miles an hour, Alboreto, Piquet following, then Ayrton Senna leading the pursuit. And Stefan Johansson now decided the time had come to go past his team leader into 7th place. Still, Mansell struggled to move away from the Ferraris. And further down the field, Philippe Alliot, second in the non-turbo category behind Streff, disappeared backwards into the gravel. But he was able to rejoin. Now Berger seemed to be about to challenge Mansell. The Ferrari was able to match the Williams both on power and agility. But overtaking in Hungary is not easy. Just as Berger started to look for a gap, suddenly Mansell came round alone. It was Alboreto now in a distant 2nd place and Piquet 3rd. And there was Berger coasting to a halt beside the pit lane. His transmission was broken. This was a difficult moment for McLaren. Johansson's final drive had locked, spinning him round, and Prost had to spin in avoidance. And now Piquet went for Alboreto, going through on the inside and forcing Alboreto to lock up on the left-hander that followed. So now normality had been restored. Williams Hondas were first, with Mansell looking very comfortable, and second with Piquet. Michele Alboreto, meanwhile, stopped soon afterwards with engine failure. Now, with 6 laps to go, came perhaps the harshest moment of Mansell's season. That was his right rear wheel nut bouncing across the road, and this is the weaving Williams coming to a premature halt. In these days of rapid tyre stops, wheel nuts are not split-pinned. Ironic that Mansell was planning to go full distance on one set of rubber. The ever-present Brazilians were delighted, but poor Nigel could not believe his fate. So once again, Nelson Piquet found himself handed the lead. It was another long walk home for Nigel Mansell. And another Brazilian 1-2 in the Hungarian Grand Prix. For Ayrton Senna was a distant second for Lotus, as Piquet took the flag for the second race on the trot. Behind Senna, Alain Prost, still down on power, was a rather surprised third, and once again the non-turbo category went to Palmer.
So Piquet's World Championship lead was strengthened, and this time all of the top four scored points except Mansell. For him, a loose wheel nut had given him another miserable weekend. A week later, the circus was over the Austrian border in the land of smiles and 3 beats in a bar. The track at the Österreich Ring is breathtaking, with frighteningly long, fast corners. This is Nakajima's Lotus approaching the notorious downhill Jochen Rindt curve. Of course, the Austrians were hoping that their own Gerhard Berger would shine on his home track, but the best qualifying position he could achieve this weekend, delayed by electrical problems, was third. Nigel Mansell had a new bone of contention this week. He was in pain after a wisdom tooth extraction.
On the first day it was dreadful. Yeah, I didn't realise how bad I was until I woke up this morning and I felt much better. And even now this evening I don't feel too good again, but hopefully tomorrow it will be even better again.
And so it was Piquet who got pole. But the other story of practice was Stefan Johansson's lucky escape. At very high speed in the number 2 McLaren, he had unwittingly used his car to go hunting, which left him happy to be alive.
Well, in the practice yesterday, on the very last lap of the morning practice, a deer ran out in the road, and I came over a brow and I didn't even see the deer until it was like 3 meters away from me, and I just hit it head on.
And after that, I mean, that damaged the car presumably, and you must have feared for your life.
Well, it didn't at the time, obviously, but I mean, he wiped the whole front of the car off, so, you know, and then I went on off the road and destroyed the car completely, basically.
Because Berger drives a Ferrari, the Austrians suddenly became Ferrari fans again. But in front of him on the grid, once more, were the tails of 2 Williams Hondas.
This race went into the history books as the one that needed 3 starts. This is start number 1. It looked a clean getaway, but suddenly up the hill there was pandemonium, and the road was full of battered machinery. Clearly, there was going to need to be another start. From the helicopter we can see Martin Brundle lose the Zach speed and go off into the barrier on the left. Behind him, Streff starts to spin and then collects his own teammate, and Campos and Arnoux are also involved. So to start number 2, and more mayhem. Nigel Mansell is slow to move, and as Piquet leads Berger and the Benettons, Patrese is launched over the front of Chiva's car, starting another chain reaction. This time the track is completely blocked. It looks horrifying, but happily no one is hurt. From Nakajima's cockpit, look to the right and you can see the beginning of Patrese's flight. So to start number 3, and this time Senna stalls on the grid, but mercifully everyone avoids him, although Arnoux hits Nannini in the background. When the dust had cleared, Piquet was leading Boutsen, Berger, Mansell, Fabi and the Brabhams, with Johansson 8th. Senna had been push-started and Alain Prost had started from the pit lane. Thierry Boutsen was putting on a wonderful display, hanging on to Piquet. But Nigel Mansell was pushing Gerhard Berger hard. As Piquet sought to increase his lead and Boutsen hung on, Mansell was able to go past Berger as they came down the long straight, pulling alongside up the hill and taking 3rd place. Once again, Stefan Johansson had only 3 wheels on his wagon, but once again he drove onto the pits for a 4th. Berger's Ferrari lasted only 5 laps, to the dismay of the Austrians. And Thierry Boutsen lost that fine 2nd place when a loose gear linkage needed attention in the pits. So now it was the old script again, Williams Hondas 1 and 2, and Mansell closing for the kill. As they approached a couple of back markers, Mansell went for the lead. And as they went up the brow, a lunge, and he got it. As they followed Nakajima into the Tirok curva to give Satoru a good cockpit view. At the end of that lap, Piquet stopped immediately for tyres. It wasn't a good stop. There was trouble with both rear wheels. But despite this, Nelson was still able to rejoin without losing his 2nd place. Mansell equally kept his lead during his pit stop. Once again, the Englishman was in a class of his own in this high-speed and demanding circuit. Alboreto completed another disappointing day for Ferrari by retiring with turbo failure. So for Nigel, both his toothache and the heartbreak of Hungary could be forgotten as he led Piquet home by almost a minute. Everyone else was lapped. And there was a new non-turbo winner for March and Ivan Capelli.
On the rostrum, the most motivated champagne sprayer was Piquet. Mansell might have outdriven him, but he knew he still had 15 points lead over his teammate. Monza, for 60 years, Italy's shrine to motor racing, and for almost 40 of those years, a shrine to Ferrari. For Ferrari's faithful apostle, Michele Alboreto, they had actually found the very car in which, many years before, he'd started his racing career. At Monza came confirmation of Honda's plans to stay with Lotus, to go to McLaren, to leave Williams. So the Williams team, which had done so much for Honda, would be losing their Japanese horsepower for 1988. But Piquet, with his move to Lotus, would remain a Honda man. And Ayrton Senna was now confirmed as Alain Prost's new teammate at McLaren, a move he found easy to justify.
The team has great achievements in the past and has everything even to be better in the future. Therefore, I feel very confident about it.
So Alain Prost, by staying put, would get a new engine and a new teammate. McLaren boss Ron Dennis had always wanted to team up with Honda.
It started about 8 years ago when I visited Japan to discuss the possibility of using a Honda engine in our Formula 2 car.
So you'll have turbo engines next year?
That's a decision that's not totally taken yet.
So it could be normally aspirated?
Yes, it isn't decided yet.
Meanwhile, Frank Williams, wasting no time, had already arranged Judd normally aspirated engines for next year. But even this weekend, Williams had something new. Active suspension on Piquet's car, which was good enough to give him pole position. A somewhat simpler system than Lotus's, it still had needed a lot of testing by Piquet to become race-worthy.
We did about 4,500 kilometers, you know, from the beginning of the project to now, and I think I've done most of these kilometers, and now everything's going all right. I don't think it make the car quicker, but make for racing make the car better.
Which meant that Nelson was getting a more comfortable ride, but clip a curb and you can still spin off. Nevertheless, Piquet took pole, a tenth of a second clear of Mansell's conventionally suspended car, which was quite a worry for Nigel. Ferraris have to go well at Monza, so Berger was relieved to be third. But Alboreto had his problems at Lesmo, although it barely ruffled his air of relaxed calm.
So yesterday was only a little mistake at the second Lesmo. The car was a little bit damaged, but not too much.
Here at Monza, enormous pressure on the Ferrari team. You feel it's friendly?
Yeah, there is a lot of people that show his love for Ferrari.
And that's exactly what they were doing from dawn on race day, with their flags and their shouts willing on the prancing horse.
But however loud they shouted, it was the Williams Hondas that led from the start, with Piquet ahead of Mansell, and then Berger, Prost, Boutsen and Senna, and Alboreto in the second Ferrari down in 7th place. Down to the first chicane. Miraculously, no untoward incidents, just a lot of rubber smoke. But as the Williams pair went on down to the second chicane, Boutsen was challenging Alain Prost, going ahead into 4th place. 6th, between Prost and Alboreto, was still Ayrton Senna. Stefan Johansson was 8th from Fabi, Patrese, De Cesaris, Warwick and Dana. Underneath the old banked circuit, into Vialoni Curve and the Curvetta Ascari. And still the Williams Hondas in the front, still the Ferraris cheered on by the crowd. To Parabolica in showers of sparks. Over the bumps, the active suspended cars of Senna and, of course, of leader Nelson Piquet looked more secure on full fuel tanks than the conventionally suspended cars. And indeed, Piquet was moving away. Behind Mansell, Berger was getting impatient and was trying to push Mansell into a mistake. He finally succeeded in doing this, going down to the second chicane, although it was Boutsen and not Berger who gained. Mansell clouted the curb. Berger was delayed, and the Benetton went through to second place. But undeterred, Berger decided to have another go, going down under the bridge to Vialoni, and this time he was successful. In fact, Mansell seemed to be having difficulty staying in touch with the first three, and behind him Alain Prost was starting to look threatening. On the main straight, however, Mansell's power told. He moved ahead of Prost, and suddenly there was red carbon fibre and Kevlar in the air. Alboreto's Ferrari had lost most of his side pod, although he kept the pressure on Prost. A brave marshal ventured into the road to get the bodywork. Now Prost was slipping back, and Ferraris were 3rd and 6th, and Mansell started to settle down. Having disposed of Berger, he set about Boutsen, taking 2nd place just where he'd lost it on lap 2. And here was excitement for the pit lane. Berger came in for his routine stop at the same time as Boutsen, and they rocketed out of the pits together, but with the Ferrari now ahead. Leader Piquet in the active Williams had his stop according to schedule. It was a long one, lasting over 13 seconds, but at least Nelson kept the revs up and didn't stall the engine this time. There was no sign of Senna stopping, and the Lotus now led the race. Piquet on cold tyres came out just ahead of Mansell, who did everything to try to pass, including using the curbs, but to no avail. Senna was long gone, until with 8 laps to go, as he lapped Ghinzani in the Parabolica, he ran wide. In this immense moment, Senna kept his foot down, but in all the dust, Piquet had slipped by. Now Senna, on his warm tyres, set about closing on Piquet. He's never a man to give up, and in the remaining laps, Senna broke the lap record repeatedly as he closed on the Williams Honda. But Nelson had control of the situation. He watched his mirrors, he drove to preserve his car, and as they raced towards the finish line, there was only 1.8 seconds in it. The start line official was so excited by the race that he forgot to hang out his checkered flag. But Piquet was the winner of the Italian Grand Prix by less than 2 seconds from Ayrton Senna. And Nigel Mansell in the passive suspension Williams was a distant third.
Another cheerful champagne fight, but privately Mansell was very unhappy. As a departing Honda driver, he reckoned he had now got an engine in less powerful tune than either Piquet or Senna. In the World Championship, he was now 20 points behind Piquet and 6 points adrift of Senna. But Alain Prost now looked as though his championship chances were gone. In the Constructors' Championship, Williams now had almost double the points of Lotus and looked even more secure. Next up, Portugal and the charming seaside resort of Estoril. Just inland is the demanding, narrow Estoril track, and here at last came the first Ferrari pole position since early in 1985. And Gerhard Berger did it despite motoring sideways while risking all and going for pole.
The first lap I had traffic, second lap I went off, third lap I do a slow lap. And I nearly want to go in the pits and stop because I say no reason to do it, try it again. But then I say no, I try, and I nearly give up too early.
Nigel Mansell was 0.3 of a second slower and was still unhappy about the power output of his Honda engine.
If I was in Honda's position, shall we say, Williams and Nigel Mansell are not going to be with Honda next year, and perhaps it would be more advantageous for them to have a Honda driver winning the World Championship. It's very easy for them to change the engine within about 10 seconds. This is very, very clever. There's a computer which looks after all the engine management, and just a few adjustments, which literally take seconds, can alter the fuel economy of the engine by 3%. Over a race distance, that's 6 litres of fuel, which is 2 laps. And there you go, you've got a formula of perhaps doing something. But I would like to think, and I personally believe, that they're not doing that. I mean, who knows? We have had a few problems.
Mansell, also in an active suspension Williams this week, was nevertheless fastest Honda-powered driver, and only a 25th of a second slower in third place was the McLaren of Alain Prost. However, Prost was trying hard enough to make this rare mistake during qualifying on a circuit that the world champion acknowledged to be one of the hardest of the year.
It's physically very, very difficult, very tiring, because it's very bumpy. You have some long corners, very tiring, especially the one before the straight. You can have a cramp in the arms or in the legs very quickly, and it's difficult to push hard the whole race, the whole distance.
Fourth quickest was Nelson Piquet, now a firm convert to active suspension. And just behind him, a car that had been actively suspended all year, Ayrton Senna's Lotus Honda. And with no Portuguese Grand Prix drivers to cheer on, the crowd left no doubt that these two Portuguese-speaking champions were their favorites.
Once again, Berger's start was not of the best, and Mansell was the clear leader down to the first turn, with Prost third and Alboreto fourth. But Piquet was inside Alboreto, and they locked wheels. Alboreto went off the road, Piquet got a puncture and damaged bodywork, and the chain reaction ran back to produce midfield mayhem. Campos showed his disgust graphically, and the race was stopped. From the new rear-facing camera on De Cesaris' Brabham, we can watch Martin Brundle going inside Nakajima and losing a couple of wheels in the process. So the field formed up again, and once again Mansell out-dragged Berger, with Piquet venturing round the outside of the Ferrari and taking to the grass. That helped Senna through to third from Piquet, Prost and Alboreto. Behind them came Boutsen, Patrese, Johansson, Chiva, Fabi, De Cesaris, Warwick and Dana, with among the non-turbos Alio leading Capelli and Streff, who were wheel-to-wheel. On to complete lap 1, and Mansell had the Ferrari in his slipstream, and Berger was determined to lead this race. On the start-finish straight, effortlessly he pulled out of the slipstream and simply drove past the Williams Honda. Here Maranello was showing real supremacy. Berger rapidly built up a big lead from Mansell, while behind the leading pair, Senna was now coming under pressure from Piquet. Alboreto was next, and Prost, as usual, was playing a waiting game. Piquet went through past Senna on the left-hander behind the pits, and Ayrton, his Honda now misfiring, was soon in the pits for a fresh black box. And then Mansell was in trouble, his hand raised, his engine dead. It was an electrical fault, and for Mansell, another Grand Prix was over. This left Piquet second, Alboreto third, but among backmarkers, Alboreto wormed past the Williams to make it Ferrari 1 and 2. But as they lapped Nakajima at the end of the straight, Piquet went ahead again. Now came the routine stops, with Prost's quick enough, thanks to this efficient McLaren operation, to re-establish himself in third place. And that third became second, with Michele Alboreto's retirement, with once again a gearbox breakage. But Berger still led for Ferrari, even though Prost, driving one of the races of his career, was closing in. With 3 laps to go, their tyres close to worn out, Berger spun. The champion's relentless pressure had told, and although Berger was able to restart and go off to finish a furious second, Prost's historic 28th victory was in the bag. Unconfined joy in the McLaren pit, but, by contrast, lonely gloom for Mansell, as once again he trudged home on foot. And by finishing third, yet again Piquet had added to his total.
A wonderful race. Alain Prost had beaten Jackie Stewart's record at last. But Gerhard Berger on the left could barely hide his disappointment. His champagne was corked. With just a week between the Portuguese and Spanish races, the team stayed in the Iberian Peninsula. There was tennis for Nannini and Alboreto. Riccardo Patrese played golf. His partner was Derek Warwick. And in the swimming pool, there were no holds barred, as Stefan Johansson discovered. The serious business began at the slender little track of Jerez, where overtaking is almost as hard as at Monaco. While Piquet earned his 4th pole position of the season, things weren't going at all well for Nigel Mansell. Nothing new in that. In the closing minutes of qualifying, he hovered between 2 available cars and earned himself a $3,000 fine for abandoning one of them at the weighing point in his haste to get to the other. Gerhard Berger used all of the road and a little bit extra on his way to 3rd place, anxious to make amends for his failure to win in Portugal. And Ferrari progress was underlined by Michele Alboreto joining him on the 2nd row. And there was a new car on the grid. A young Italian, Nicola Larini, qualified at his 2nd attempt in the normally aspirated Coloni 4. Although this was Spain, Nigel Mansell's loyal fans were at hand. The local talent had only Adrian Campos to cheer on.
Front 2 rows had 2 Williamses and 2 Ferraris, and at the green, plumes of rubber smoke from Mansell helped Piquet to take the lead and watch Senna from row 3 to 3rd place before the first corner. In all the bumping and boring down the field, René Arnoux was already in trouble, and so was Adrian Campos in his home Grand Prix. So it was Piquet, Mansell, Senna, Berger, and then Alboreto, Boutsen and Fabi, De Cesaris, Prost and Chiva. Mansell sideways, Berger even more sideways, but Mansell's blood was up. At the end of the lap, he was through on the inside of Piquet and accelerating away into a lead that he was never to lose, even though Piquet went one side and then the other to try to get the lead back, and Ayrton Senna was right there with them. Behind Senna, 2 Ferraris, 2 Benettons, and behind Andrea De Cesaris, Alain Prost was rather out of things at the moment. Alboreto, perhaps tired of being in his junior teammate's shadow, unexpectedly took him for 4th, just as Fabi tried to do the same to Boutsen. And Prost was now getting underway at the back of this queue in 8th place. Mansell, in a class of his own, was, as expected, pulling away, and he was able to come in for fresh rubber, and, after a smooth Williams pit stop, he was able to rejoin without losing the lead. Nice clean visor, fresh tyres, off the jacks, and away he goes. And as he comes out, he's right in front of his teammate Nelson Piquet, who's second. Piquet, knowing that Mansell's tyres would not yet be up to their best operating temperature, was pretty sure that he could now get ahead of Nigel. But Nigel, of course, had other ideas. Although he knew that Piquet himself would have to stop soon, he wasn't about to let his teammate by, and he was able to keep the door firmly shut until his tyres were warmed up again and he could pull away. Behind Senna, Berger wanted his 4th place back, and Prost, now 6th, seized his chance to profit from their inter-team squabble and take a tighter line than either of them expected. So now the Professor was 4th. Piquet's tyre stop came next, and Nelson let his foot slip off the brake as he blipped the throttle. The rear wheels kept turning, which slowed the pit crew down, and Piquet's pit stop stretched to 19 seconds. Finally it was done, and as he rejoined, Senna and Prost came by, and Piquet had to chop across in front of Berger to take 4th ahead of the 2 Ferraris. He disposed of Prost on the pit straight, but missed his braking point as a result. That produced a nice, neat 180-degree pirouette. So now Senna, in 2nd place, led a high-speed queue of Prost, Boutsen going by Alboreto, and Piquet lining up to lap Chiva. Berger had dropped out of this group when he made his tyre stop. For Nigel Mansell, this was another copybook drive. But behind second man Senna, the order was now Boutsen, Prost, Piquet and Berger 6th. Piquet had another go at Prost down the pit straight, and this time he did manage to get round the corner at the end. Alboreto had dropped out of this group, having his routine tyre stop, but Berger was now up there again. Jonathan Palmer, leading the non-turbo category, was carved up by René Arnoux comprehensively enough to put his Tyrrell over the wall. And now Piquet passed Boutsen for 3rd. Berger had passed Prost for 5th. Chiva, a lap down, was keeping them all in sight. But could Piquet dislodge his fellow Brazilian from 2nd place? Senna, once again, was running the full distance without a pit stop, and his tyres were by now well worn. Berger, whose Ferrari was now smoking noticeably, ran wide, perhaps on his own oil, although he kept on motoring. And now came Piquet's lunge at Senna, who was running very short of grip. He went through on the inside this time. Very close, but he got through. And Boutsen and Prost seized their chance while Senna was off his line and the Lotus was pushed down to 5th. Berger's smoke, meanwhile, spelt retirement, and the oil that he had left was to catch out Nelson Piquet, who at least kept pointing in the right direction. And it caught out Thierry Boutsen, who didn't. There was no grip in that gravel, and his race was over. Piquet needed a pit stop to clean mud and grass from his air intakes. And then more smoke heralded another Ferrari retirement, that of Alboreto. So Mansell, after all his dramas on Saturday, turned in a truly professional performance on Sunday, with the ever-professional Prost second from McLaren teammate Johansson. And once more, Nelson Piquet, after all his problems, scored championship points with a 4th place.
So Nigel Mansell had 9 points at last, and Nelson Piquet was missing from the rostrum for the first time in 10 races. With 3 races to go, and with Piquet only able to count his best 11 scores, the title was still within Mansell's reach. But in the Constructors' Championship, Williams-Honda were now unbeatable. For the 2nd year running, Frank's team had taken that title. And the first ever Colin Chapman Cup had already been clinched by Tyrrell. Now Europe was left behind for the final trio of races. Work your way through the crowded streets of Mexico City and past its controversial policemen to the edge of town, and you eventually arrive at the Circuito Hermanos Rodriguez. As we see from Nakajima's cockpit, the surface of the track is as unwrinkled as an electrocardiogram. Nigel Mansell fell foul of the bumps on the first day of qualifying and crashed heavily. But on Saturday, he was back in the groove and earned his 8th pole of the year. Both Williams drivers were back with the conventional chassis car for the rest of the season. Gerhard Berger was in the top 3 for the 6th race on the trot, joining Mansell in the front row, but Nelson Piquet also found the bumpy track difficult. He ended up 300ths adrift of Berger. Thierry Boutsen, who looked competitive all weekend, qualified a strong 4th and underlined this by being fastest of all in the pre-race warm-up. Alain Prost was 5th in the McLaren, and behind Fabi's Benetton, an unhappy Ayrton Senna was a lowly 7th. As for the Mexican crowd, when it comes to enthusiasm, they rival the Italians.
Nigel's hard-won pole didn't benefit him much. Nelson Piquet was very quick away and squeezed between Berger and Mansell. This is the driver's eye view from the 8th row. But down at the front, it was Berger and Boutsen on one side, Piquet and Mansell on the other. And as they sorted themselves out, the Ferrari and the Benetton were moving away. And Mansell had dropped to 5th behind Prost, with Senna challenging. In the double right-hander at the back of the circuit, Prost got a bit close to Piquet, and his nudge spun the Williams round. The McLaren, with its front wheels towing out, was an instant retirement. And as Berger and Boutsen went on their way, Mansell was now 3rd from Senna, Alboreto, Fabi and the Brabhams. Nelson Piquet, meanwhile, was still stationary, gesticulating to the marshals for a push, which he finally got. This incident had spaced the field out, and the 2 Bs, Berger and Boutsen, were now well in the lead. Boutsen was lining up to challenge. Mansell was clear in 3rd place, while Senna and Alboreto were literally wheel to wheel. Then Nakajima missed his braking at the end of the straight and walloped Warwick's arrows. and in the aftermath, Johansson and Danner were also involved. No one was hurt, but Derek Warwick, minus the Arrow's rear wing, was able to drive onto the pits for a new one. And on the next lap, Boutsen made his move, slotting neatly through on the inside. But in the curves that followed, the Ferrari was able to get on the inside and go ahead again. This time, it stayed ahead. And before long, poor Thierry Boutsen was rolling to a halt with electrical failure. All that left Berger sitting pretty, until 2 laps later, the Ferrari's turbo blew. More Ferrari smoke, another retirement. Michele Alboreto, in the other red car, was already out. So for once, Nigel Mansell was able to profit from the misfortunes of others, and he settled into a comfortable lead, planning to go the whole way without a tyre stop. Ayrton Senna in second place was rather taken aback to be attacked by De Cesaris, but it didn't do the Italian much good. Nelson Piquet, meanwhile, had come up from dead last to 4th behind Patrese Brabham, and was obviously going to get further. Then came an immense accident on the 160-mile-an-hour right-hander before the pits. Warwick's Arrows, perhaps weakened by its earlier accident with Nakajima, had a suspension failure which sent Warwick into the wall. Happily, Derek was able to get himself out, but the tyre barrier was badly damaged and the race was stopped. The video replay showed that the Arrows had just understeered straight off the road, and the tyre barrier had done its job well. So the survivors lined up again, and at the restart, Nelson Piquet was in very determined mood. Into the first corner, the 2 Williamses and the Lotus were almost 3 abreast, and Nelson moved across on Nigel in a decisive chop to take the lead. Mansell wasn't too concerned, however. He knew that the final result would be calculated by adding together the elapsed time of the 2 parts. And he'd finished part 1 43 seconds ahead of Piquet. Behind Senna, who was 3rd, Cheever now led Fabi and Patrese. Piquet continued to stretch his lead on the road, but behind Mansell, Senna had a duff clutch, and after a spin, he couldn't restart. This promoted Patrese to 3rd, on his way to Brabham's 2nd podium finish of the season. So the flag for Piquet, who'd made up 17 of the 43 seconds cushion that Mansell had had. And it was 9 more points for Nigel, and another non-turbo in the top 6, thanks to Philippe Alliot and the Lola.
And this time, the champagne battle between Piquet and Mansell seemed to reach a new level of frenzy. The World Championship battle was now between just these 2. With Senna and Prost failing to score in Mexico, and with only 2 races left, only Mansell could still catch Piquet. Olé! From Mexico, far west to far east, and the first Japanese Grand Prix for a decade using the Suzuka circuit. For Piquet, this race was crucial. His 3rd world title was tantalizingly close. For Mansell, it was do or die. To keep his title hopes alive, he simply had to win. But it was Friday practice that brought the shock of the weekend and spelled a premature end to the championship battle. Nigel Mansell was going for pole when, in the curves behind the pits, he lost his Williams Honda. The tremendous impact did the damage. Mansell was in agony in the cockpit. He released the wheel but couldn't get out. As Frank Williams waited anxiously for news in the pits, the marshals attended to Mansell, who was grimacing with pain. And in this thoroughly unsatisfactory and melancholy way, Nelson Piquet became champion. What happened was that Mansell had clipped a curb on the previous curve. The car ran wide coming out and got into the dust on the outside. It spun at once, went backwards into a tyre barrier, and flipped into the air. Mansell's crash landing produced some internal bruising. His season, at any rate, was over, And already Piquet was pointing out that Nigel's misfortune wasn't all that had won him the title.
I don't win today the championship, and I don't win because Nigel stopped. I win because I'm 12 points in the lead. It's still two races to go, and I win because I collect a lot of points this year. I was very consistent, and everything apart, I had a lot of problems. Everything worked well for me.
On Honda's home territory, to their chagrin, it was the Ferrari of Gerhard Berger that took pole position. Outgoing champion Alain Prost joined him on the front row, just half a second slower. And Thierry Boutsen, who had pole for much of the final session, had to be content with third fastest. To underline Honda's embarrassment, their best car was Nelson Piquet's Williams, a lowly fifth. Ayrton Senna could only manage seventh after various practice problems, but local knowledge helped his Lotus teammate Satoru Nakajima up to 12th, which was much appreciated by the home fans. Even as late in the season as this, there was a new face. Roberto Moreno had taken over Pascal Fabre's AGS. The championship might be settled, but for the huge Japanese crowd, Formula One was an enthralling new experience.
This time, Berger got his start right, unlike teammate Alboreto, who virtually stalled. Somehow everyone got round him, but further back, Alio cannoned off Palmer into the wall. Prost was instantly on the attack, but Berger wasn't having any. Boutsen was already up to third. And back on the grid, Alio, after the shortest Grand Prix this year, was out of his car. Round the demanding Suzuka track went the high-speed queue, led by Berger's Ferrari and Prost's McLaren. Behind third man Boutsen, it was Senna, Piquet, Fabi, Johansson, Patrese and De Cesaris, with Nakajima in a splendid 10th. Palmer's Tyrrell was the first non-turbo, ahead of Capelli, and Michele Alboreto was last. So Ferrari last, Ferrari first, and only Prost looked threatening. With memories of Portugal, Berger was going all out to pull clear. But what he didn't know was that Prost was already in trouble. With cruel luck, somewhere the McLaren had picked up a puncture. And at once, Boutsen, Senna, Piquet and the rest were going past. It was a long way to the pits, and the McLaren's wheel and tyre would look pretty second-hand by the time Prost got there. Boutsen's second place didn't last long. With the Benetton losing power, Senna went through to second, Piquet to third, and then Johansson demoted the Belgian to fifth. So now, a long way behind the leading Ferrari, we did have a Honda battle. Lotus versus Williams for second. And further back, among the midfield battles, this was non-turbo leader Capelli tangling with Arnoux, which was to put the Italian out. Berger, with a comfortable lead, didn't want to lose time in his routine stop, and the Ferrari crew did him proud. Less than 7 seconds. Stefan Johansson had made his tyre stop early and was now second ahead of Senna, upholding McLaren fortunes while Alain Prost drove hard but out of the points. And the new world champion, Nelson Piquet, was in the pits with terminal and rather messy engine maladies. The Ferrari crew didn't dare stop worrying until their man was in sight at the end of his final lap, coming home to score Maranello's first win for over 2 years. But once the checkered flag had waved, in the Ferrari pit, the celebrations began. And Honda honour was somewhat redeemed by Senna snatching second place from Johansson virtually at the final corner. The other Honda finisher, local hero Satoru Nakajima, was also in the points, in 6th place.
So Ferrari had done it at last, their first win for over 2 years, after a flawless drive by Berger. And Ayrton Senna was now only 4 points behind the absent Mansell. So in the championship, there was still a battle for second place. But Piquet had his third world title. and as some sort of British compensation for Mansell's unerring misery, Jonathan Palmer could now not be beaten for the Jim Clark Cup. So to the final round in Adelaide. Over the past 3 years, this race has become a popular finale to the long, hard season, and the round-the-houses track is a good one. The drivers were in an end-of-term mood as they posed for what might well be described as a school team photograph. One of them was missing, of course, the injured Nigel Mansell. He was at home in the Isle of Man. Taking his place in number 5 Williams Honda was the driver who will join him at Williams next year, Riccardo Patrese, who seemed happy at this chance of joining his new team prematurely. His place at Brabham was filled by Stefano Modena, the brilliant young driver who had won the Formula 3000 championship at his first attempt and was now grabbing with both hands the chance of a first Formula One drive. And on pole for the second race running, Ferrari and Gerhard Berger. In a further repeat of Suzuka, Alain Prost was second fastest. But third was Nelson Piquet, shrugging off claims that with his title, he was easing up. It was back to learning the track for Nakajima after Japan, and this resulted in more than one spin. Andrea De Cesaris was carrying our rearward-facing camera, and this is what it saw when his BMW engine's turbo blew up. His young Brabham teammate was trying hard, and the occasional error didn't put him off at all. He was 15th on the grid. Race day and 105 degrees, if you could find some shade. If not...
Well, no shade anywhere in those 26 cockpits, and lest new hero Berger should get any ideas above his station, the new world champion decided to deal out a sharp lesson, hurling his Williams into an instant lead. Prost was third, Senna fourth, Alboreto fifth, and Patrese sixth. But Berger didn't want any lessons from Piquet. And as they went down the straight, he stormed up the inside to retake the lead, while Senna did the same to Prost. Behind them, a puff of smoke signalled Nannini's trip into the wall and out of the race. Berger didn't take long to get into his stride. Behind Piquet, Prost was retaking Senna, and Alboreto, Patrese and Boutsen followed. The Ferrari was already looking invincible, with Berger riding the curbs at the chicane, and by lap 6, his lead was 6 seconds. Prost now had Piquet in his sights, and Senna was being challenged by Alboreto for 4th place. Piquet decided on an early tyre change. And after this stop, watch his progress past the line of pit watchers as he rejoins the race. Suddenly we had a 3-car battle for second place. Prost was challenged simultaneously by Alboreto and Senna. Senna came off best, Prost came off worst. Adelaide is perhaps the hardest track all season for punishing brakes, and the McLaren's brakes were certainly wilting. Stefan Johansson's had failed completely, putting him out of the race. And then, as Alain Prost pursued Michele Alboreto, his front brakes failed, and as his rears locked up, he spun into retirement. None of these maladies seemed to afflict Berger, although he was trailing sparks from a piece of, fortunately, harmlessly dragging bodywork. Piquet was another in braking troubles. Watch his left front brake disc explode. His gear linkage was breaking up too, so he had to stop. And Riccardo Patrese's first Williams drive came to an abrupt end when his engine blew and he spun on his own oil. An inauspicious start with his new team. And still, the mighty Berger reeled off the laps in what was clearly one of the most demanding races of the year to score his second win on the trot. Ferrari were certainly back in the winner's circle with a vengeance. Already it seemed that they'd never really been away. But behind Berger, there was still a story to be told. Ayrton Senna took a brilliant second place. But in post-race scrutineering, his extra brake ducts fitted to cope with this circuit were deemed to be too big. He was disqualified, and this final race became a Ferrari 1-2, proof at last of their rebirth, and not a Honda engine in sight.
3 very tired drivers on the rostrum. Berger barely had the strength left to spray the warm champagne. But in the final championship table, his late season charge had moved him ahead of Johansson into 5th place. Behind the victorious Piquet, Mansell's second place was intact. There was nothing left to go wrong.
Well, that was the 1987 season. A lot has happened off camera while you were watching that. During the Portuguese Grand Prix, a car came through here which was stopped by the people at Checkpoint Charlie and thoroughly examined. They thought they'd got something, but it was only Bernie Eccleston. And the dogs were terrified of him because of his imposing presence. And he, of course, got through. 006 is his serial number. And although it doesn't look as if there'll be much of a Grand Prix in Berlin, because there really is a German Grand Prix, since there is one now in Hungary, I think I can promise you, without going overboard, there will be a Grand Prix in East Germany soon, in the German Democratic Republic. It may start humbly with 2-stroke engines only. May the best man win.